Welcome to Iconic Sonics. I'm Mike Gastineau. Great to have you back with us. It's brought to you by Swinomish Casino and Lodge and Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. If you're a fan of Iconic Sonics, and frankly, I can't imagine you not being a fan, do me a favor, rate and review the show. Share it with the Sonics fans in your life. We would be most grateful for your assistance. We've got an interesting Iconic Sonic on the show today, a guy who fans remember for a variety of reasons that we'll get into. Jim McIlvaine, it's good to see you again. Thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, it's been a while since Deathless Outings, right?
Well, here's the deal. I feel like I've known you through three distinct hairstyles, if nothing else. And we're actually changing the name of the podcast to Hairstyles with Jim. So it's a good thing. But you had kind of the buzz cut when you came here as a player. And then when you came back for debt, you looked like you were touring with the Grateful Dead. You had big long hair. And now you got kind of almost a Florida look. And I think that's where you're hanging your hat these days. So I think it's good. Is that right? Are you in Florida?
There's a good explanation for all of that. I had the flat top all the way through my pro career. And then when I retired, I grew my hair out to donate to Locks of Love. And so I only got out long the one time, and it took me a couple of years. And then I went back to the flat top, but my wife, Gwendolyn, doesn't like the flat top. So this is kind of the look that she likes. It might be getting long on me, but I'm such a cheapskate. My barber is back in Wisconsin. I haven't seen him since like October. So I'm not going back until probably May. So it's going to be a while before it gets cut.
So you only get your hair cut at the barber. Is this like the guy from your youth? Is it the guy you've gone to forever?
Not even that. It just, I went to a place down here in Florida when I first moved down here and got a cut, and the guys were sitting in the chair and they were debating in Spanish whether to charge me $20 or $30. And then the guy said, let's charge him $30. So I've been reluctant to go back because my guy in Wisconsin charges me $8 and feels like, the world is stopped for him when you tip him $4.
It's good, and not to make light of this because it's a real problem. We those of us who cover the sport, we see stories of guys that get a lot of money and then they, for various reasons it can all go away, and it's very sad when that happens. It seems like you've got a handle on this. If you're sticking to a $22 difference in a haircut, it seems like you're okay. Life is good for Jim McIlvaine. Is that good to assume?
I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying. I made mistakes, but not enough that they've cost me dearly like they have for a lot of other guys.
What are you doing these days?
I work for a car battery company, Optima Batteries. And when I retired from basketball, I started working for car magazines because I had wanted to screw around with cars when I got done playing, and I just wanted somebody else to pay for it. And I found a way to do that working for car magazines. And then a lot of magazine editors end up getting hired away by the advertisers. And that's kind of what happened with me with the battery company.
It's funny, when we first reached out to Jim, you sent me a text and you said, yeah, I can't do it at this time. I'm transporting a bug. And I thought, in this day and age, I'm like, what is Jim into, like international espionage? Is he moving some kind of bad vibe? And I said, what does that even mean? And you sent me a picture of a VW bug. And I remembered that you were a NASCAR fan when I first knew you, and then I'd forgotten that you had gotten into cars. You always kind of had been into cars, right?
Yeah. I try to be smart about it. And somebody asked me the other day how many I have. I think I have 9 right now, but almost all of them are kind of like that bug. They're not worth that much. Like the truck I toted over to Tampa with, I bought for $3,800, and the bug I paid a COVID price because my friend lost his job. I think I gave him $7,500 for the bug, and it just needed a little electrical work that was beyond my ability. So most of my cars are in that range, but they're fun and a little bit unique, and they fit.
Well, if we've learned anything today, it's that Jim McIlvaine is now transporting bugs, and go ahead and do with that what you want. Jim, let's go back to the summer of '96. You've just finished up your first 2 years with the Bullets, a Bullets team that had a ton of talent, but a lot of it young and maybe hadn't figured out how to win yet. You're a free agent. You can go wherever you want. Take me through the summer. Were there any other teams that talked to you? How did you hear about or how did you connect with the Sonics? Take me through just getting to Seattle.
Well, the thing with the Bullets, Kornheiser and Wilbon didn't have their ESPN show at that time. So they were local in DC and they covered the team, and they coined it the curse of the Bullet. And they were convinced no matter who we had on the team, there was going to be injuries to the point where we'd always finish like 10 games below 500 or something. And there was some truth to that, because we had phenomenal players. We had Mark Price, we had Scott Skiles, Robert Pack, we had Chris Webber, Tom Gugliotta. I mean, just stacked with all these guys that missed all or most of a season to injury. And that was really how I got my break. George Mirasan, and it was funny, when I got drafted by them, my agent said, don't worry, they've got Kevin Duckworth and George Mirasan, and that's who you're going to be behind. And they drafted you because Kevin Duckworth's at the end of his career and he's not going to be able to make it through a season. And he didn't. He got hurt. I think he played 40 games my rookie year. And he said, George's body will never hold up. Well, George's body actually held up better than just about everybody else's, until about the last 10 games of my second season. He went down for the rest of the season with an injury, and I got to play the most minutes I ever played ever in the NBA in those last 10 games or so. And I actually did pretty well, averaged almost a double-double, and almost had a triple-double against the Bulls with block shots, a couple points or a couple blocks short of that. But that caught the attention of everybody in the league. And anybody who's upset over my contract would have to agree I had the best agent in the business. And he knew that after my second year, I'd be an unrestricted free agent. And he knew the timing of the salary cap with a bunch of teams around the league. And he knew after my second year, there was going to be a bunch of salary cap opening up with a bunch of teams. He didn't like Washington. I loved the coaches. I loved my teammates. It was the organization that he wasn't crazy about. And one of the Washington papers did a big expose on it. Years later, they caught me on Hot Rod Power Tour after they had the falling out with Michael Jordan. At that point, they were just asking me to confirm everything else that everybody had already told them about what was going on with the franchise. And they're like, is it true you practiced in a gym at Bowie State University that Bowie State wouldn't use anymore? I'm like, yeah, that's true. And is it true only 2 of the showers worked in the bathroom? Yeah, one of them was like a fire hose and the other dribbled water. And the toilets all flushed hot water and the showers were cold and all that stuff. So he wanted to get me out of there. I signed an offer sheet with Minnesota after my first year. And the Bullets waited until after training camp to match it. Kevin McHale wanted me to be there with Kevin Garnett and surround him with good people. And then there was some things in the contract in the offer sheet that the Bullets fought the NBA over, because they knew that Chris and Juwan both got parking inside the arena in Washington, and that my agent said, well, everybody gets parking inside the arena in Minnesota, so write that into the contract because they won't want to match that. And it's fought over stuff like that. And I came back to the Bullets for another year. And then after my second year, after those last 10 games, man, the phone was ringing off the hook. I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe it even more when my agent told me how much he was going to ask. And I said, I don't understand the logic behind these numbers. And he said, well, you're a center in the NBA, and this is, below the average starting salary for most NBA centers. And Adam Keefe just signed a deal the summer before, and he's a power forward, and that's a more common position, and he's making a bunch of money. And he's like, don't worry, teams will offer it to you. And he was right. And Seattle wasn't even the highest. Washington ended up being the highest. Cleveland was the highest for a while, and they gave most of that money to Zdronis Ilgauskas, which worked out pretty well for him.
Right.
And then at the point where I signed with Seattle, Juwan Howard had signed with Miami and left. And then that they got busted for tampering or something, and that contract was nullified. And then Juwan went back to Washington. So when I signed with Seattle, I was looking around, and Brent Price had signed with Houston, and it looked like all the key guys on the team were either retiring or they were bailing out and going somewhere else. So Seattle had played to the finals the year before, and at that point, I just wanted to win a championship. And Steve Scheffler and I had the same agent, and Sheff raved about the Sonics, the team, the franchise, the city, everything about it, and sold it really well. And he didn't oversell it in any regard. It was absolutely my favorite place to play. The fans were the best, the arena, the city, the team, the teammates. It was just such a tremendous experience. I'll never forget it, and I enjoyed every second of it.
Well, that kind of gets to my next question, which is, what do you think when you think back on Seattle? You clearly people still talk about, oh my gosh, this contract, and then that led to Sean leaving, which is, there's a couple of jumps you got to make to that. It led to internal strife. Did you feel welcome from the time you got here? Like, did you and Sean get along, and you and George? Did everybody get along outside of apart from the business side of this?
I got along with everybody, or at least I felt like I did. And, Sean came over to my house for dinner, and we still keep in contact with each other. But for as great as my agent was at a lot of things, I don't think he understood the dynamic between George and Wally, who was the GM at the time. And they had talked about trading Sean before. And so I think it wasn't related specifically to me, but I think there was a lot of things that were building up with Sean's unhappiness. I think my agent was way better than his agent. And there's, multiple stories. Anybody who watched that Bulls documentary saw the deal that Scotty signed, which at the time he signed it, it made sense because he had come off an injury, and you want the security of a long-term deal, and you don't know where things are going to go. And so you take the security of the long-term deal, and then you got to live with it to an extent. So there was some frustration there, I think. But it was just, the dynamic between George and Wally. And George told me, he sat me down right away and kind of set the tone and said, I wanted Bison Daly, Brian Williams. I didn't want you. And I'm like, okay. And then he wanted me to lose like 15 pounds. And I'm like, well, George, what happened? What about Shaq? Because Shaq had just signed with the Lakers. He's like, well, we only play those guys 4 times a year. I'm like, well, what about Sabonis? Well, we only play those guys 4 times a year. What about Ostertag? Well, we only play those guys 4 times a year. I'm even at the weight I'm at right now, which I worked like crazy for 2 years to go from like 240 to 265. I'm giving up a bunch of weight, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds to some of those guys. And he's like, I just want you to get up and down the court quickly. And so I really didn't, add a bunch of weight, but I added strength. Bobby Medina and Dwight Dobb were great strength coaches and had a program set up for me. And I enjoyed it. Top to bottom, it was such a top-notch staff they had there.
And ultimately, did you and George, I mean, that's got to be a weird feeling to have a coach tell you right away, hey, well, I actually wanted another guy. But did you guys get along, or was it tough playing for him, given, the very first meeting is, well, we wanted somebody else. And again, that was part of him and Wally's thing too.
Yeah. When I saw George at Rick Majerus's funeral, and actually I saw Kathy there first. I said, George is my favorite coach to play for in the NBA. I absolutely love playing for him, because why wouldn't you? Those were the only 2 years I made the playoffs. The team won all the time at a ridiculous clip. And he had the absolute best assistants top to bottom in the game. And you look at the guys he had on staff, Bob Weiss, Dwayne Casey, Terry Stotts, Tim Gergerich. I mean, those guys were all head coaches. And Gergerich, is like, I think it's undisputed. He's the best coach at any level in, college or pro, and everybody loves that. Will run in walls for. So I told Kathy, George is my favorite coach to play for. She's like, really? You should tell him that. And so he came over and we were talking. We had a great conversation. I really loved his style of play. I loved his approach to the game and his philosophies, and it was fun. I really, really enjoyed playing for him.
You've always had, and I've interviewed you a few times, and you were not close friends, but your personality has always been one of I don't know if easygoing's the right word, or letting stuff roll off your back. You were the target of a lot of criticism, and people wanted more out of you for the money and all that. Here, George tells you, I wanted Bison Daly instead, and you end up saying, no, he was my favorite guy I ever played for. Is that seems like that's kind of your personality, to roll with stuff and to maybe try and find the good? Am I jumping at something there, or is that accurate?
Part of it also is understanding the NBA in a way that I never understood it as a fan until I got there. And when I signed with Washington as a rookie, I went to Summer League, and it wasn't until after I played well in Summer League that they decided to offer me a contract, and they offered me a multi-year deal. And, again, my smart agent said, no, we're just going to sign a 1-year deal. I'm like, we're leaving money on the table. He said, don't worry, they'll offer you more money next year. And they did. So I signed a 1-year deal in Washington, and Juwan Howard held out, and he didn't come in until after the season started. And they put him in the first game, and he did not play well at all. But Jimmy Lineman, every time I was like, keep feeding Juwan, keep giving him the ball. And I think he put up 10 shots in that first game. And I think in my entire career, I had maybe one game where I took 10 shots. I'm like, wait a minute. I shot like a really high percentage from the field in college, and I was doing well in practice. They never looked to give me the ball like Juwan. It's like, well, Juwan's a lottery pick, and they're spending a lot of money on him, so they got to get him comfortable. So the rules were different. And the same thing happened the next year when Rasheed Wallace came in. He came in hoisting threes and missing shots left and right, and it didn't matter. Give him 12 shots today. We'll give him 13 shots tomorrow. We'll give him 15. And I'm there like, I got 6 points and 5 rebounds and 3 blocks in 10 minutes, and they're not going to play me the next game at all. But that's the way it is. So when you're in that environment, you have to understand where your place is and what you can do to help the team, and focus on what you can control, and don't worry about the stuff you can't control. And I was so fortunate to play with so many great 3-point shooters. I had a lot of fun setting screens. And my goal was to get Dale Ellis or Hersey Hawkins or Detlef or anybody as wide open as I could, so there would be absolutely no excuse, and they'd have the cleanest look at the basket, and that would help us win games, and I love doing it.
Jim, one of the guys you mentioned in the first half, I just wanted to ask you about him because he was such an intriguing guy. He's a pretty good player, and I know he's still involved in basketball. What kind of teammate, and were you ever on the floor together for any length of time with George Murasan? Did they ever roll out, both of you? Because Murasan, I loved watching him play, and he was an intriguing character, and we learned a lot about his life. What kind of guy was George?
George is still a fantastic guy to this day, and I probably stay in touch with him more than anybody else. He actually has a son on Georgetown right now, and both of his sons will walk on Georgetown. And he still lives in Northern Virginia and does work with the Wizards and runs basketball camps. And he's got a place down here in Florida that I haven't been to yet, but one of these days we'll connect down there. George is just, you couldn't believe what a great guy he is. And to be in the position that he's in, because he had a medical condition that caused his abnormal growth. And, you know, when you look back, I'm almost 50 years old now, at how old he was then. He was a kid. You know, we were all kids. And he's facing this medical condition. He doesn't know if these shots that he's injecting into his stomach every day are going to do the trick and stop his growth. Because the world's tallest man ever was Robert Wadley. He was like 8'11", and he died from this condition. And people die from this condition when it's left untreated all the time. So, you know, George is living in the moment, you know, and not like he's going out and, you know, messing around with hookers and snorting cocaine because he might die tomorrow. But absolutely loving and living every minute of being in the NBA and being around his teammates. And he still, I feel like he has that approach today. He just never takes a day for granted and enjoys everything. And frankly, he's in way better shape than when I first met him that I ever thought he would be. You know, who knew if he was even going to live to 40? And now he's, you know, 50 something, and he's in pretty good shape and doing really well.
He is at the key of one of my favorite all-time NBA stories. I was sitting, the Sonics are playing the Bullets at the Tacoma Dome, so you're there with the Bullets, I'm sure. And so you might remember this. I don't know. Murasan comes in, he picks up 3 fouls in like a minute and a half, and he's just sideways about it. And he comes over after the 3rd foul. He's coming out of the game, and he lets Dick Bavetta have it. Now, I'm not sure what language George was speaking. He speaks more languages than me, but I mean, he unloads on Bavetta in whatever language he's using. And he finally walks off, and Jim Lynam is standing there, and Lynam looks at Bavetta and goes, "He says he didn't touch him, Dick." I always loved it. Lynam was so deadpan when he delivered it.
He said, Susha, 2 years with him, and the only words we learned in Romanian were swear words, Susha mi pula.
Good. It's good. It's cultural. They're trying to export the very best of the best. You come to Seattle, and you mentioned Sean. What about Gary? I mean, such a dynamic personality, and really he had come into his own in that '96 season, and was acknowledged as one of the great players in the league. What kind of teammate was Gary Payton?
Gary was so consistent, and all those guys were. He put up the numbers every night. And Frank Furtado, will never get the credit that he deserves for keeping all of those guys together, because Gary played heavy minutes, and Eric Snow was there, who ended up being a great point guard in the NBA. But, one of the other things I learned about George is he was reluctant to play younger guys. And so, right. Eric could have played 10, 15, 20 minutes a night, especially against some of the teams that we were blowing out. And George, wanted to stick with his starters and his heavy minute guys. And especially Nate, by the time I got there, Nate was, being held together with duct tape and baling wire by Frank. And the whole, from the beginning of the season, the whole approach was, let's save Nate for the playoffs and try to keep minutes off his legs until then. And so it was amazing to see the minutes that Gary put in. He didn't have like a muscular body like a Stephon Marbury, and he got knocked around all over the place by some, Al McGuire would call them aircraft carriers, the absolute biggest guys in the league. He'd bounce right back up, knock down his free throws, and then go talk trash to you at the other end of the court, steal the ball, and go the other way. And he did it 80, I don't know if he played all 82, but he was close to 82 games a season in the regular season.
That's in the middle of about a 7-year stretch where I think he missed like 3 games, maybe total over 7 years. He was unbelievable. What was the difference in the team? We focus on Kemp leaving, and it was a sad day, and it was a shame the way things fell apart, and might have been different if he had just stayed. Who knows? It can be easy to overlook Vin Baker, and especially that first year. Vin, what happened to a lot of guys in that lockout year, Vin gained some weight, and I'm not sure he was the same player afterwards. But boy, that first season, you guys win the division, you have a great season, and Vin has a very good year. What were the differences dynamically between the Sonics with Sean and the Sonics with Vin?
Both outstanding players in their own right. I think the biggest difference that we saw was from the media and the lack of, chasing down some salacious story they were trying to dig up about somebody not getting along with somebody else, or Sean's late for this, or there's just no drama there. And it wasn't really drama created by the team or by the players. It felt like people looking for a story that they could talk about. And talk radio, as you know, was really starting to take off, the sports talk stuff. And so people needed stuff to talk about. And I remember sitting in the lobby with Terry Stotts, 20 or 30 games into the season. He's like, I can't believe how this team is clicking and how well we're playing. And there's just, no hiccups. Nobody's got any stuff chasing them down. And you look around the league, and there's always, a guy here or there that's running into trouble, and it drags on the team. And we just didn't have any of that. And it wasn't like Sean was ever a drag on the team. It always felt like the outside influences. And there were certain reporters that would threaten you, national guys that would say, if you don't tell me what's going on, I'll make it up, and it'll make you look even worse. So you might as well say something. And it just, it would infuriate you that they had that kind of control and sway.
There were national reporters that did that to you, like to you or to others?
Because I didn't know anything. I'm
Right.
going to, the movie theater in the adjacent mall to the hotel, and going back to my room and staying out of trouble. And I was just, trying to not, get in anybody else's business. So they wouldn't come after me, and nobody really cared about stories about me. It was all the all-star guys that, those are the headline grabbers.
Right. And saying the year with Vin Baker, you guys are a pretty good team that year. And then at that point you move on. But it's funny, because one of the things I was going to ask, and I don't have to, is, what if you hear the word Seattle, what do you think? It sounds like you, and again, part of your personality, you remember the good times and then let whatever else happened kind of float away. They were good teams, weren't they? I mean, George had a run here, and better than me. And I remember George used to talk about this. In some ways, staying really good for 6 or 7 years in the NBA is as hard, if not harder, than winning a championship. Would you agree with that?
And those teams, to be able to keep that core group of guys together with Detlef and Gary and Sean and to be able to plug in pieces where you needed to, when you needed a lift in certain spots or for certain minutes. It was I thought a masterful job, not only by George in playing the games, but in Wally and assembling the teams. And it was an exciting time to be in Seattle, and it frustrated me to no end that we couldn't win a championship with that team, because it felt like it was really close, and we saw it in the regular season when we could beat these teams. But make no mistake, there was some really tough teams out west when we were out there, and it seemed at that point like the shift had gone west, where Utah was really good, the Lakers and Portland and Sacramento was solid, and Phoenix and Houston, you just had your hands full every night out there.
Before you got to the NBA, you had a terrific career at Marquette. You played for Kevin O'Neill, who's a pretty dynamic guy in his own right. I'm wondering though, and you did some radio work for the Warriors, and clearly you're still, I mean, shoot, you go back there to get your haircut. You're clearly still involved in the Marquette culture. Did you cross paths and get to know the great, unfortunately, the late, great Al McGuire? Did you ever visit with him?
A little bit here and there. And Al kind of knew that when Kevin O'Neill got hired at 34 years old, people were making all kinds of comparisons. Here's another young Irish Catholic coach coming into Marquette to turn things around. So I don't think he wanted to cast too big a shadow over Kevin. So he wanted to give him his space and as much as he could. But he would pop in every once in a while. And, the stories you hear are all true. He'd ride a motorcycle a lot. He had a Harley. And then sometimes he'd go over to the old gym where we practiced. And they call it the old gym because it's built in like 1910 for the ROTC. And there's like a nondescript 85 Buick Century sitting out back with like a bunch of junk in the back seat and a shotgun. And it's like, oh, Al's here. You walk into the gym and Coach O'Neill says, Al's going to talk to you guys. And so he sat us all down in the stands, and we're all sitting there, and he doesn't say anything. He's just looking at us, and he throws $100 bill on the ground, and guys like are lunging at it. And he steps out with his foot and slides it back. And he says, I just want to make sure things are still working the same way around here. But, his message to us is pretty simple and it's pretty clear. And I tried to take it with me, and some folks would say I maybe mastered it. He just said, use basketball. Don't let basketball use you. He said, you're in a great school, take advantage of it, earn your degrees. The game doesn't last forever, but a degree will. And, don't let this game take advantage of you. Don't let it destroy your body and leave you with nothing. And that resonated quite a bit with me. And it was, the limited amount of time I got to spend around Al was fantastic. He stayed busy because he was still doing TV at that point.
He said something once I heard him speak, and I'm sure other coaches had figured this out, but when he said it to me, I remember thinking, God, what a the basics, the smart people, generally the ones that figure out the basics. And one of the things Al McGuire talked about was, when he was recruiting a kid, you had to have a meal in the house with mom and dad and all that. But he says, if I took the kid out, I didn't take him to a nice place. He's a 17-year-old kid. We'd go get a hot dog or a burger and sit. And he said, that's where a kid would feel comfortable. And I'm thinking, boy, the number of coaches that probably thought I'm going to impress this kid and take him to a fancy restaurant. Now the kid's nervous as hell, as opposed to, and he talked about mainly in New York City. He said the best deal in New York was you just take the kid down to the corner and say, which hot dog stand is best? And you buy a hot dog there. Basic, simple stuff, right?
Yeah, but and that's probably all against the rules at this point. But Al had that connection with guys because he grew up in New York in the city, and he spoke the language of kids who lived in the city, and it didn't matter if they were black or white. He was from the streets, and it wasn't fake, it wasn't a show, and it wasn't all about him. He genuinely cared about his guys and would go to bat for them and be honest with them. And people maybe don't know this. I'm the second best gym that played high school basketball at my high school. That's a center, because Jim Jones was an All-American at Marquette, and he went to my high school. So Jim Jones is the best gym to ever play center at my high school. And he had a great year, and Al told him, and Marquette probably could have broken up UCLA's streak that year. Al said, you got to go, the ABA's offering you this money. You got to take this money. Go take this money. And Jim Jones left, and Marquette didn't win the championship that year, but probably could have had Jim Jones stuck around. But, that was Al looking out for his guys, and he saw the opportunity, and it would have been certainly to Al's benefit to have Jim stick around. But he knew Jim's family situation, and he knew the opportunity was too good to pass up. And so, I think guys appreciated that honesty that he shared with them.
I know we're running up against time, but I want to ask you a little bit about your wife, Gwendolyn Gillingham. We've got two things I want to talk about. And before we get to the why this is a really big weekend for her, we'll talk about that in a second. And I know this is a lengthy story, but if you can give us the quick version. You guys met as a result of Hurricane Katrina, which shows you great things can come out of a really bad situation. Give me the quick lowdown on how you guys met, or how you re-met, I guess is better to put it.
I played in the Olympic Festival at UCLA in '91, and her sister was a 3-time All-American at Vanderbilt, was playing out there the same year. Gwendolyn came out with her parents and watched, and I met all of them at the time. Couldn't hang out with Gwendolyn much because she didn't have athlete credentials, so I hung out with Heidi, and we got to know each other a little bit. But I had already started dating the girl that I ended up marrying, so it wasn't like I was interested romantically. It was just shocking. Literally, that was the first time in my life I was able to hang out with girls that were like my height, since I had become my height, you know?
Yeah.
And I didn't think that was ever going to happen again. So I never forgot them. And then fast forward to 2005, and Hurricane Katrina hits. And I'm up in Alaska doing a game for Marquette on the radio, and there's nothing to do in between games. And so I'm just surfing the internet, and there's a website for tall people, and it's not like a dating site, but like a resource and information, like which cars fit the best and where to find clothes. And I had tall people in the news, and said 6'7" Hurricane Katrina evacuee, Gwendolyn Gillingham. And I'm like, that's the girl from the Olympic Festival. I thought she was married, and she was living with family in Minnesota, and I was right next door in Wisconsin. I had a cabin that I don't really use, but a few times a year. And so I reached out to her cousin's husband and said, it's a great school district. She can stay there with her kids as long as she needs to. And he shared the message with her, and she's like, I don't know that guy. He couldn't know us from college. We played at different schools. I was at Carolina, and I've never heard of Jim McIlvaine. Don't call him back. He's a stalker. And so he didn't. And then when I got back to Wisconsin, I called just to see if he got my voicemail. I called him, explained how I knew the girls. And like within 2 minutes, he was trying to set me up on a date with her. And I'm like, I'm not calling for a date. I'm just trying to help. I actually reached out to Irvin Johnson before that because I knew he had family in New Orleans. And said, Irvin, if you need a place, send them up to my cabin because it has 7 beds, so it's got plenty of room up there.
Right.
But he had moved over to Florida and had his family living over in Florida after the hurricane. So I was trying to help.
And she was living in like Mississippi and couldn't go back to her home, and that's how this whole thing. And
yeah.
Lo and behold, you get with her, and next thing you know, it's like, wait a minute, I'm getting married again. How about that?
I know, craziest thing ever to think it could go down like that, but that's the way it ended up.
Now, by the time this airs, we'll know the results of everything, so I'm not going to ask for a prediction. But as we record, it's the Thursday before the Final Four. And the other thing about Gwendolyn Gillingham, who is now Gwendolyn McIlvaine, is she played for North Carolina for a national championship team in '94, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things about her, and that's definitely one of them.
Is she, what kind of Carolina fan? I'm tempted to ask, is she like an insufferable Carolina fan? Is she fun to watch the games with? I mean, does she get into it still? What's her like level of angst for the weekend?
She hates Duke, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And she loves her coach and her teammates. And we'll go up to Carolina every once in a while, but she's, we've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and she homeschools them. And she was actually thinking about playing volleyball in college at Baylor. And you can't brag about being from Texas if you go to Baylor. So she ended up in North Carolina, and she liked their colors better. That's the crazy way girls pick colleges. I like their colors better. I can't brag about being from Texas. And so she's not a basketball fanatic. We had our kids both play for the first time this year. But we don't live it, breathe it, sleep it, all that stuff. We'll watch it though.
Yeah. This Carolina Duke game feels like it's going to say by the time this airs, we'll know, but it feels like it's going to be pretty epic. I mean, you couldn't set it up any better.
Eric Church canceled his concert because he's such a Carolina fan. He couldn't DVR the game. He wanted to watch it live with his family.
Yeah, I'd say good luck to him next time he tries to go back to San Antonio. I mean, on one hand, I think it's kind of a chump move, but whatever, you're going to go to the game. You probably have, it's like when you get 86th from a bar. You're okay. Well, we can't go back to that place. He may not be able to go back to San Antonio after this one.
I just think if you're that nuts about your team and that's March Madness, you got to leave that open on your calendar. Play Tuesday night instead, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of people said the Final Four, they schedule it way in advance. You know what it's going to be. Jim, it's great catching up with you. I'm glad you're doing so well, and things are going great in Florida. It's fun visiting with you. You've always been a really open and honest and fun guy. The McGuire stories are great. I appreciate those, and wish you continued good health and success, man. Congratulations on you got a life well lived right now. Things are going well for Jim McIlvaine.
I have no complaints, and I really appreciate you having me on the broadcast. I'd like to say hi to everybody out in Seattle that's listening. I miss them, and I'll try to get back out there as soon as I can.
Well, when the Sonics get back, you got to come back out.
I would absolutely love to. They deserve a team, and they should have never lost the team they had.
Jim, thanks again.
Thank you.
Jim McIlvaine, Iconic Sonics with the 96, 97, and 97, 98 teams, and some great stories for us. It's all brought to you by Swinomish Casino and Lodge and Dick's Drive-In Restaurant. If you like Iconic Sonics, two things you can do. Go to iconicsonics.com. You can get information and look at more episodes from the past. Also, rate and review the show and share it with Sonics fans in your life. I'm Mike Gastineau. We'll talk to you next time on Iconic Sonics.